Hello, everyone. The little boy ran across the executive lobby, wrapped his arms around a billionaire's leg, and shouted, "Dad." The bankrupt man waiting for a job interview recognized the child's eyes before anyone spoke his name. What happened next was not a story about revenge. It was about the years a father can lose while believing money will buy him time later. Stay with us, because the decision made at the end of this Chicago interview will challenge everything you think forgiveness means. And if stories about family, accountability, and earned second chances matter to you, subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who still believes people can change. Our story begins 4 years earlier, on an anniversary night Blake Harrington thought was only another business interruption. Snow had begun falling over Chicago by the time Evelyn Brooks lit the third candle on the dining table. The roasted chicken was warm, the chocolate cake was uneven, and the small gift beside Blake's plate had cost less than the wine he usually ordered at business dinners. She had chosen it because the silver keychain carried 3 words that mattered more than its price. Best dad ever. Evelyn was 7 months pregnant with their first child. She had spent the afternoon feeling the baby kick whenever music played from the kitchen radio. Blake had promised to return by 7 for their 3rd anniversary. At 9:30, the elevator finally opened outside the penthouse. He entered carrying a leather folder and a face prepared for resistance. "You are late," Evelyn said, trying to smile. "But dinner can be reheated." Blake removed his coat. "We need to talk." The folder bore the name of a family law firm. Evelyn's smile disappeared. "What did you do?" "I filed a petition for dissolution of marriage this morning. You will receive the formal papers through the proper service process." For several seconds, the only sound was the wind against the windows. "You filed for divorce on our anniversary?" "The date was not intentional. You had to write it on the documents." Blake placed the folder on the counter. "My attorneys prepared a proposed settlement. It includes temporary housing, continued health coverage, and financial support during the case." Evelyn rested both hands over her stomach. "You are speaking as though our marriage is a company you decided to liquidate. I am trying to avoid a prolonged fight." "Then tell me why." Blake walked toward the windows. Harrington Technologies had grown from a small software contractor into a company preparing for a public offering. Investors examined every expense, every executive departure, and every rumor. Blake had become convinced that fatherhood would make him appear distracted at the moment he needed to look unstoppable. "The board wants complete focus," he said. "The next 18 months will determine whether the company survives at this level. And you think a wife and child make you weaker? I think obligations create limits." Evelyn opened the gift box and placed the keychain beside him. "Our son kicks when he hears your voice. I bought this because I thought you were becoming something better than a successful man." Blake looked at the engraving, then away. "I will meet every financial obligation. A child does not measure a father in bank transfers." He did not answer. Evelyn did not sign the proposed settlement. She called an attorney the next morning and learned that a petition began a legal process. It did not end the marriage, decide the home, or allow Blake to remove her without agreement or court authority. Her lawyer filed a response and requested temporary orders addressing housing, health insurance, pregnancy-related medical costs, and future child support. Blake's attorney urged him to settle privately. He agreed to let Evelyn remain in the penthouse until she found a safe apartment and to continue paying the mortgage and medical coverage while the case proceeded. Evelyn chose a modest place near her doctor and a bus line. She moved 3 weeks later because she wanted distance, not because Blake ordered her out. At the first court conference, the judge asked whether the parties understood that the child's financial and legal interests could not be bargained away for convenience. Blake nodded. Evelyn watched him sign documents creating temporary support and preserving medical coverage. The legal system could require money and disclosure. It could not create concern. Evelyn delivered 8 weeks later after labor began on a city bus. Strangers cleared space around her. The driver stopped and called emergency services. At the hospital, the emergency team evaluated and treated her without waiting for proof of payment. Billing staff could discuss insurance after she was stable. Labor was not postponed while someone searched for a credit card. Oliver Brooks Harrington was born healthy after a long night. Because Evelyn and Blake were still legally married, the hospital and attorneys handled the birth record and parentage according to Illinois law rather than pretending one spoken instruction could erase a legal parent. Blake's name appeared in the records, and the final divorce judgment later addressed child support, health insurance, decision-making, and a gradual parenting schedule. Blake visited once when Oliver was 6 weeks old. He stood beside the bassinet, stared at the sleeping baby, and asked Evelyn whether the meeting could be shortened because a lender had called. "You requested parenting time," she said. "My attorney said it was important. Your son is important." Blake looked uncomfortable. He touched one finger to Oliver's tiny hand. The baby closed his fist around it. For 1 second, Blake's face softened. Then his phone vibrated, and he stepped into the hallway to answer. The parenting plan allowed short visits that could grow through consistency. Blake canceled the next 2, attended one, and then stopped requesting them. Child support continued through the formal system. When payments became irregular during a company cash crisis, income withholding stabilized them. Evelyn used the funds for childcare and medical expenses. She never told Oliver the money came from love. The final divorce took nearly a year, not a single evening. Both sides exchanged financial records. The penthouse, retirement accounts, company interests, debts, and medical obligations had to be identified before any settlement could be approved. Evelyn did not receive everything she requested, and Blake did not control every outcome simply because he had paid the lawyers first. At a settlement conference, Blake offered a larger lump sum if Evelyn agreed not to seek future adjustments to child support. Her attorney explained that support belonged to the child's interests and could not be treated like a private favor traded for silence. Evelyn rejected the proposal. "I am not trying to punish you," she told Blake in the courthouse hallway. "I am trying to avoid explaining to Oliver someday that I exchanged his security for a faster divorce." The final judgment divided the marital property, continued medical coverage for a defined period, established guideline-based child support, and allocated decision-making responsibilities. Blake was offered a structured path to parenting time. Nothing in the order prevented him from becoming present. He simply did not use it. Evelyn's apartment became an education in limits. The heat worked unevenly. The kitchen had one reliable outlet, and the laundry room was 2 floors below. She learned to carry Oliver, a basket, and a bag of detergent without waking him. She learned which grocery store marked down vegetables on Tuesday evenings and which bus driver waited when he saw her running with a stroller. One night, Oliver developed a fever that climbed faster than the nurse line expected. Evelyn carried him to an urgent care clinic, sat beneath fluorescent lights for 3 hours, and returned home at 2 in the morning. She still opened her laptop at 6 because a data entry deadline determined whether rent would be paid on time. Ruthless schedules had once impressed her when Blake described them as the price of greatness. Now she understood the difference between chosen ambition and survival. She promised herself that if she ever led people again, she would remember that workers had children, illnesses, aging parents, and lives that did not disappear when a meeting began. Her neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, became part of Oliver's early world. She was a retired bookkeeper who watched him during interviews and corrected Evelyn's practice spreadsheets with a red pen. "You understand the numbers," Mrs. Alvarez said. "Stop apologizing before you explain them." Evelyn began speaking her conclusions first instead of burying them beneath disclaimers. That change helped her in the talent competition, but it also changed the way she saw herself. She was not returning to the woman she had been before Blake. She was becoming someone who understood exactly what her work was worth. Survival occupied every hour. Evelyn entered financial data remotely while Oliver slept and studied accounting at night. Before her marriage, she had worked in corporate administration but left when Blake persuaded her to help build Harrington Technologies without a formal title. She had designed vendor controls, organized contract reviews, and prepared reports that later appeared under executive names. Now she needed credentials that could not be removed with a marriage. She completed certificate courses in financial analysis, borrowed textbooks from the library, and submitted a case study to a national corporate talent competition sponsored by Callahan Capital, a respected Chicago investment firm. The assignment required applicants to evaluate a fictional acquisition and identify risks hidden behind impressive revenue growth. Evelyn found that the target company was counting and signed customer forecasts as if they were enforceable contracts. She also noticed that executive bonuses encouraged sales teams to record revenue before performance obligations were satisfied. Her report did not merely reject the deal. It proposed a revised structure with holdbacks, independent verification, and protections for employees if the acquisition failed. Grant Callahan read the analysis without knowing anything about her divorce. He asked Human Resources to invite the highest-scoring candidates to a blind final round. Evelyn arrived wearing a second-hand navy suit and carrying a folder stained by juice from Oliver's cup. The panel asked why she focused on incentives instead of only numbers. Numbers record human decisions, she said. If the incentives reward people for hiding risk, the spreadsheet eventually becomes a story no one should trust. Callahan Capital offered her a junior analyst position. The salary was not extraordinary, but the company provided health insurance, tuition assistance, and on-site childcare. Evelyn accepted because it offered a path rather than a rescue. Her first year was difficult. She arrived early, left on time for Oliver, and studied after he slept. Some senior analysts assumed motherhood made her less available and therefore less ambitious. Evelyn responded with preparation. She documented assumptions, checked source data, and asked questions other people avoided because they did not want to appear difficult. During a proposed acquisition of a regional medical billing company, she discovered that projected revenue depended on contracts that could be canceled without penalty. The deal team dismissed her concern as overly cautious. Evelyn prepared a concise memorandum and sent it through the proper review channel rather than creating a public confrontation. Grant read the memorandum and ordered additional diligence. Investigators found that the seller had concealed major customer losses. Walking away saved Callahan Capital more than $40 million. At the next board meeting, Grant credited the diligence team and named Evelyn's analysis specifically. He did not promote her immediately or invite her to dinner. The firm began a formal performance review. Months later, she became a senior analyst because her record supported it. Grant and Evelyn worked together for nearly 2 years before their relationship became personal. By then, she reported to the chief investment officer, not Grant. When he asked her to coffee outside the office, she said yes only after confirming that company policy permitted it and that neither of them would control the other's compensation or evaluations. They disclosed the relationship to the board's ethics committee when it became serious. Grant did not impress Oliver with wealth. The boy liked him because he read dinosaur books in different voices and remembered that green cups were better than blue ones. On their first trip to a neighborhood zoo, Oliver became frightened when he lost sight of Evelyn in a crowd. Grant knelt and said, "We do not move until Mom can see us." He stayed exactly where he was. Evelyn noticed the difference between a man who treated patience as weakness and a man who understood that safety sometimes meant standing still. 3 years after Evelyn joined Callahan Capital, Grant proposed during breakfast in her apartment. He did not present marriage as repayment for what she survived. "You built your life before I entered it," he said. "I am asking whether we can keep building together." Oliver, now almost 4, interrupted from the hallway. "Does this mean Grant lives here and makes pancakes every day?" "No one should eat his pancakes every day," Evelyn said. Grant laughed. "That is a fair condition." They married 6 months later. Grant became Oliver's stepfather, but they did not pretend the wedding automatically changed legal parentage. Blake remained Oliver's legal father, subject to the divorce judgment and support order. Because Blake had not consented to adoption and had not legally lost parental rights, Grant did not adopt Oliver. The family used honest language. Grant was dad in Oliver's daily life, while Blake was his biological father, a man he might someday choose to know under safe and appropriate circumstances. Their courtship was built from unremarkable moments. Grant attended Oliver's preschool open house and sat in a chair designed for a child half his size. He learned that Evelyn became quiet when she was overwhelmed and that asking, "What do you need?" was more useful than offering a solution before she answered. Evelyn learned that Grant called his older sister every Sunday and still carried guilt about missing the final months of his father's illness while building the company. They disagreed, too. When Grant canceled dinner twice because of a transaction, Evelyn told him she would not repeat a marriage where business emergencies always outranked promises. "The deal could affect hundreds of jobs," he said. "I understand responsibility. I also understand patterns. Do not ask me to ignore one because your reason sounds noble." Grant did not accuse her of comparing him to Blake. He changed the staffing plan, delegated part of the work, and showed up the following week when he said he would. Trust grew because conflict produced evidence, not speeches. Before their marriage, Grant asked what role she wanted him to have with Oliver. "Be honest," Evelyn said. "Do not promise forever to a child unless you are prepared to make legal and practical decisions that support it. Do not compete with a father who is absent. Oliver is not a prize." Grant agreed. He met with a family counselor to understand step-family dynamics. He and Evelyn created wills, guardianship preferences, insurance plans, and emergency authorizations. These documents lacked the romance of a proposal, but they answered the questions families face when illness or crisis arrives. On the wedding day, Oliver carried the rings in a wooden box and announced to the guests that Grant had practiced pancakes until they were almost good. Grant's vows to Evelyn did not claim he would erase her difficult years. He promised to respect the strength those years required. His promise to Oliver was shorter. "I will listen, tell you the truth, and keep showing up." Afterward, Evelyn kept the surname Brooks professionally for a time and used Callahan socially only when she chose. Her identity was not treated as a corporate rebranding. When she later became Evelyn Brooks Callahan in public records, the decision belonged to her. The family never hid Blake's existence. A small box in Evelyn's closet contained the divorce judgment, early photographs, and records Oliver might want when he was older. Protecting a child from adult conflict did not require destroying history. It required preserving truth until he was mature enough to carry it. Evelyn's career continued independently. She became director of strategic investments after leading a team that redesigned Callahan Capital's acquisition controls. An outside compensation committee reviewed her promotion. Grant recused himself from the vote. Callahan Capital did not become easier after Evelyn's first success. Visibility created new expectations. Some colleagues assumed Grant had favored her because he had read the winning report. Others tested her by withholding information until the last possible moment. Evelyn responded by building systems that made information ownership harder to manipulate. She created a diligence checklist requiring each acquisition team to identify the source, date, and responsible reviewer for every major assumption. She added a contrary evidence section to investment memoranda so analysts had to record facts that weakened their preferred recommendation. Senior executives resisted. "We hire people for judgment," one managing director said, "not to complete more forms." "The checklist does not replace judgment," Evelyn replied. "It creates a record of what judgment was allowed to ignore." The director disliked the answer until the system exposed an environmental liability hidden inside a warehouse portfolio. The seller had described cleanup costs as unlikely. Evelyn's process required the team to attach the regulator's original notice, which showed the obligation was already active. Callahan renegotiated the price and placed funds in escrow. Grant thanked Evelyn privately. She corrected him. "The associate who found the notice deserves the credit. My checklist only gave her permission to keep looking." That response shaped Grant's respect for her more than the financial savings. He had met brilliant people who wanted ownership of every success. Evelyn wanted a company where the next person could succeed without needing unusual courage. She also changed how the firm treated working parents. After a snowstorm closed schools, Evelyn noticed employees taking calls from parked cars because they were afraid to admit they had children at home. She proposed emergency remote work rules, backup childcare stipends, and meeting windows that avoided routine school pickup times. The policy was reviewed for cost, security, and equal access before approval. Productivity did not collapse. Retention improved. Years later, employees would praise the policy without knowing it began with a woman who had once typed financial data while rocking a feverish baby with her foot. Evelyn's promotion to Director of Strategic Investments came after she led a year-long review of acquisition failures across the industry. Her report concluded that the most expensive mistakes rarely began with a lack of intelligence. They began when powerful people made disagreement costly. The board adopted her recommendation for independent risk reviews on deals above a defined threshold. Blake would eventually interview under the same system she helped create. The irony was not that Evelyn gained power over him. The irony was that she built a company where no individual, including herself, could use personal power to decide his fate. Meanwhile, Harrington Technologies began collapsing. Blake had pushed the public offering too early, borrowed against projected growth, and approved the purchase of a cybersecurity company whose revenue depended on temporary contracts. Two directors warned him that the numbers were unstable. He removed one from the strategy committee and ignored the other. When major customers left, lenders demanded repayment. The offering was canceled. Employees were laid off. Investors sued over disclosures, though no criminal charges were filed. Blake lost control of the company in a restructuring and sold his penthouse to satisfy personal guarantees. Blake's fall was slower than the headlines suggested. For months, he had missed targets by describing them as timing differences. He asked employees to work weekends, delayed vendor payments, and promised the board that one large contract would restore confidence. Each decision purchased a few weeks, while making the final correction more painful. His chief financial officer, Lena Park, warned him that projected renewals should not be presented as committed revenue. Blake accused her of becoming timid. "I am not asking you to abandon growth," she said. "I am asking you to label uncertainty honestly." He removed her from investor presentations. She resigned 2 months later and documented her concerns to the audit committee. The committee ordered an independent review. Although investigators found reckless forecasting and governance failures rather than criminal fraud, the damage to trust was immediate. Lenders tightened terms. Customers delayed renewals. The board replaced Blake as chief executive. On his final day, he packed awards, photographs, and the silver keychain Evelyn had given him. He had kept it in a locked drawer for 4 years, not because he honored it, but because throwing it away felt like admitting what it represented. He called Evelyn once after the restructuring. She let the call go to voicemail. "I am not asking for anything," he said in the message. "I wanted to know whether Oliver is healthy." Her attorney responded that Oliver was well and that any request for contact should follow the existing legal process. Blake felt insulted until he remembered that predictable boundaries were exactly what he had failed to provide. He did not file a request then. Shame still controlled him. He told himself Oliver was better without disruption, though part of him simply feared being seen as a stranger. The Callahan interview forced the question into the open. Seeing Oliver call Grant dad made delay impossible to disguise as sacrifice. Blake finally understood that protecting a child and protecting himself from rejection were not the same act. For years after leaving Evelyn, he searched for executive work. Most firms respected his early achievements but questioned his recent judgment. A recruiter finally contacted him about an executive director of corporate development opening at Callahan Capital. The recruiter did not know his connection to Evelyn. Blake did not know she worked there because he had avoided news about her. He passed 2 preliminary interviews and arrived for the final round on a gray Monday morning. The executive lobby overlooked the Chicago River. Blake sat at a walnut table reviewing notes when Grant entered with the independent hiring committee. Evelyn followed, carrying reports from a meeting that had just ended. Blake stood so quickly that his chair struck the wall. "Evelyn." The room became silent. Evelyn recovered first. "Mr. Harrington and I were previously married," she told the committee. "I need to recuse myself from this search." The general counsel thanked her and confirmed that she had not reviewed the candidate list. Grant disclosed his own conflict as Evelyn's husband and withdrew from the hiring vote. An independent director took over the interview. Before Evelyn could leave, Oliver ran from the family room holding a drawing of a blue dinosaur. "Dad, I finished it," he called to Grant. Blake turned. Oliver had Evelyn's green eyes and Blake's narrow smile. He stopped when he noticed the unfamiliar man. Grant accepted the drawing, then looked toward Evelyn for guidance. Evelyn placed a hand on Oliver's shoulder. "This is Mr. Harrington. He is here for a business meeting." Oliver nodded politely. "Hello." Blake could not speak. He watched the boy take Grant's hand and understood that affection had grown in the space he left empty. Evelyn guided Oliver away. The committee offered Blake time to reschedule, but he chose to continue. The interview focused on business. Directors asked about failed controls, layoffs, and the acquisition that accelerated his company's collapse. Blake admitted that he had silenced dissent. "I believed leadership meant removing obstacles," he said. "Eventually, I removed every person willing to tell me the truth." One director asked how he would respond if a subordinate challenged a deal he strongly supported. "I would require the concern to be documented and independently reviewed," Blake said. Confidence should not be allowed to audit itself. His answer was thoughtful. It did not erase his record. The committee delayed its decision while conducting reference checks and reviewing litigation. They ultimately offered the position to another candidate with stronger recent experience in regulated acquisitions. Blake received the decision without accusing Evelyn or Grant. He knew neither had voted. A week later, he requested a conversation with Evelyn through her attorney. She agreed to meet in a mediator's office, not in her home or workplace. "I saw him," Blake said. "I know I do not have the right to arrive after 4 years and ask him to call me anything." "You have legal responsibilities," Evelyn answered. "A relationship is different. It must be built around Oliver's needs, not your regret." "I want to try." Evelyn did not immediately agree. She asked whether he was seeking relief from guilt or prepared for a process that might move slowly and indifferently from what he wanted. "I do not know," Blake admitted, "but I am willing to find out honestly." They consulted a child development specialist and family law attorneys. The plan began with letters Blake wrote, but did not send directly. A therapist reviewed them for language that placed no burden on Oliver. Blake attended parenting education and maintained support payments. Months later, Oliver received a simple age-appropriate letter explaining that Blake was his biological father, that Blake had made serious mistakes, and that none of those mistakes were Oliver's fault. The reunification process did not move forward simply because Blake completed several classes. The specialist interviewed Evelyn and Grant separately, reviewed the history of canceled visits, and asked Blake how he would respond if Oliver refused contact. "I would be hurt," Blake said. "That was not the question." He took a breath. "I would respect it and continue doing what the court and therapist consider appropriate." "What if he never calls you dad?" "Then I will not ask him to." "What if he loves Grant more?" Blake looked down. "Grant has loved him longer in practice. Oliver should not have to reduce that bond to protect my feelings." The specialist recorded the answer but did not praise him. Consistency, not one correct conversation, would determine the recommendation. Blake's first letters were rejected because they contained too much explanation. He wrote about investor pressure, childhood poverty, and fear of failure. The therapist returned them. "Those facts may matter when Oliver is an adult," she said. "Right now they ask a child to understand the man who abandoned him. Begin with what the child needs to know." Blake rewrote the letter. "My name is Blake. I am your biological father. I was not present when you were little, and that was not your fault. You do not owe me a meeting, a name, or forgiveness. I am learning how to be responsible, and I will respect the adults who have kept you safe." Evelyn approved that version. At the museum, Oliver spent the first 10 minutes speaking only to the therapist. Blake did not fill the silence. When Oliver finally asked, "Why didn't you come before?" Blake answered without blaming work or Evelyn. "I made selfish choices, and then I was ashamed. Waiting longer made the mistake bigger." Oliver considered this. "Mom says adults have to fix what they can. She is right. Can you fix all of it?" No, the honesty mattered more than a promise would have. Oliver asked Grant, "Are you still my dad?" Grant answered without hesitation, "Every day. Can I have 2 people who care about me?" "You can have as many people who care for you safely and honestly as your life allows." The first supervised meeting lasted 30 minutes in a children's museum. Blake arrived early and left his phone in the car. He did not ask for a hug. He did not explain bankruptcy, investors, or divorce. He asked Oliver about dinosaurs and listened to the entire answer. When Oliver left, Blake sat alone for several minutes. The meeting had not transformed him into a father. It had shown him how much work the word required. Over the next year, contact increased cautiously because Blake remained consistent. Grant did not compete with him, and Evelyn did not pretend the past had disappeared. Boundaries stayed clear. Oliver's emotional security came before the adult's desire for resolution. Blake accepted a vice president role at a smaller manufacturing company. The title was less impressive than his former position, but the board valued transparency. During his first major proposal, a young analyst challenged his revenue assumptions. Everyone waited for Blake to react. "Put the concern in the report," he said, "and schedule an independent review." The analyst looked surprised. Blake understood why. Years earlier, he believed humiliation would be watching another man raise his son. The deeper humiliation was recognizing that Grant had not stolen a role. Grant had performed it. Evelyn had not poisoned Oliver against Blake. She had protected the child from confusion while leaving room for truth. At Oliver's 6th birthday party, Blake attended for 1 hour under the family plan. He stood near the back while Grant helped light the candles. Oliver opened a gift from Blake, a beginner's telescope, and asked whether they could use it together at the next visit. "I would like that," Blake said. The words were simple. No one applauded. Evelyn did not cry. Grant did not step aside dramatically. Real repair rarely resembles a movie ending. It is quieter, slower, and governed by the person who was most vulnerable. Blake never regained the family he abandoned. Evelyn did not return to him, and Oliver did not replace Grant. What Blake gained was smaller and more demanding. The opportunity to become trustworthy one kept promise at a time. Evelyn's victory was not his failure. It was the life she built through skill, lawfully protected boundaries, and the refusal to let bitterness make decisions for her. Grant's strength was not his money. It was his willingness to love a child without treating the child as proof that he had defeated another man. And Oliver's future was not determined by the worst choice made before he was born. He grew up surrounded by adults who eventually learned that fatherhood is not a title awarded by biology, marriage, or wealth. It is a responsibility demonstrated through presence. Some people lose money and rebuild it. Some lose status and earn another position. Time is less generous. It does not return the first word, the first step, or the nights a child reached for someone who was not there. But when accountability is real and the child's well-being remains first, the future can still contain something better than revenge. It can contain truth, boundaries, and a second chance that is earned rather than demanded. Years after the interview, Evelyn returned to the university extension program where she had once taken night classes. She spoke to a room of working parents, displaced employees, and adults who believed their chance had passed. She did not tell them that determination guaranteed a billionaire husband, an executive title, or a dramatic moment of justice. She told them that rebuilding was usually less glamorous. "It may look like finishing one assignment after your child falls asleep," she said. "It may look like asking for the source behind a number everyone else accepts. It may look like using a legal process even when someone powerful wants you to sign quickly. Progress is not always a door opening. Sometimes it is learning that you are allowed to knock." Mrs. Alvarez sat in the front row beside Oliver and corrected Evelyn afterward for speaking too quickly. Grant smiled. Some systems of accountability cannot be retired. Blake did not attend the speech. His relationship with Oliver remained separate from Evelyn's public life, protected from spectacle. He and Oliver used the telescope during supervised visits, then later during longer afternoons approved under the updated parenting plan. Blake never posted photographs online or described the contact as proof that he had been forgiven. One evening, Oliver found Saturn's rings through the lens and shouted for both Grant and Blake to look. The two men stood several feet apart in Evelyn's backyard, each waiting his turn. There was no friendship between them, but there was respect for the child who connected their lives. That moment captured the story better than any boardroom surprise. Grant did not become smaller because Oliver wanted to know Blake. Blake did not become a father by demanding equal recognition. Evelyn did not surrender her boundaries by allowing carefully managed contact. Each adult accepted that love for a child is measured by what the child is permitted to need, not by which adult wins. The cruelest punishment was never watching another man cherish what Blake discarded. It was recognizing that the door to responsible fatherhood had remained open through law, support, and structured parenting opportunities, and that pride kept him outside. His second chance began only when he stopped asking whether he deserved entry and started asking what would make Oliver safe. That is the difference between regret and accountability. Regret asks how the past can stop hurting the person who caused it. Accountability asks what the injured people need now, accepts that the answer may be uncomfortable, and keeps doing the work after sympathy, attention, and applause have disappeared.